Imagine a world where the word orphan is linguistically obsolete. I don't mean we just found homes for everyone. I mean the entire nuclear family structure has dissolved into something so open that every child is, in effect, everyone's child.
That is a very specific utopian vision you're painting there.
It gets more specific. Now, in the same world, imagine there are no court systems. None. Because the friction that causes lawsuits, property disputes, inheritance battles, that's all been engineered out of the social code.
And crime drops by a very precise number.
Exactly, 75%. Domestic violence is extinct, and the daily grind of cleaning and cooking just vanishes. And here's the thing. This isn't a sci-fi novel or some, theoretical exercise from a philosophy class. We're talking about a manifesto.
And a manifesto that claims to have a 10-year track record of proof.
Right. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a fascinating, dense, and frankly startling collection of writings by an author named Xuefeng. We're breaking down a document called the 36 Articles and a community model called the Life Oasis.
Which used to be called the second home.
Exactly.
And before you, the listener, maybe tune out at the mention of a blueprint for society, we need to be clear. This isn't some dry academic paper. This is a document that proposes completely rewriting the rules of marriage, governance, economics, and even biology.
It claims to solve exactly 21 fundamental human problems.
Problems that our current systems, democracy, capitalism, traditional socialism have all failed to fix. It's a huge claim.
A very bold claim. So our mission today is to just suspend judgment for a bit and really unpack the logic inside this life oasis. We're going to look at why the author thinks moral education is a trap, why privacy might be the enemy of happiness, and how he plans to turn what he calls the toiling masses into something, completely different.
It really is a complete re-engineering of civilization. And I think we need to start with the why. Why does Xuefeng believe we have to just start over? The text opens by identifying these 21 specific problems that plague humanity.
And these range from the really domestic to the totally geopolitical. We mentioned the housework and the orphans, but he also lists things like the plight of the elderly.
Right. He argues that in our system, the elderly are either a burden on their children or, if they don't have children,
They just live in loneliness and insecurity.
Exactly. The Life Oasis promises that the elderly are cared for by the collective, regardless of money or biology.
He also promises that bachelors and spinsters will just vanish. No one is lonely.
And then he zooms way out. The text claims this model eliminates the need for political parties entirely. No more competition, which he sees as just chaos.
And no armies.
Total elimination of armies. Military spending drops to zero. And he envisions a world with no national borders, so you get free migration across the entire globe.
Which all sounds pretty utopian, but then you get to the environmental claims and things get a little metaphysical. The source says pollution will vanish, extinct species will come back, and climate disasters will just stop. And then there's point number 21, which is a bit of a curveball.
Yes, point 21. It states that, and I'm quoting here, at least half of the population will sublimate into angels or bodhisattvas.
Just casually dropping that in there. Half of us become angels.
It sounds wild, but it connects the physical survival of the planet with spiritual elevation. The text argues that if you change the environment, if you remove the stress of survival, humanity literally evolves.
And he's not just saying this is a nice idea.
No, he insists these aren't empty promises. He says there's ironclad proof based on the development of these life Zen courtyards over the last decade.
Okay, so how? How do they propose to achieve all this? Because the source uses the word communism, but it immediately redefines it.
Correct. He creates a distinction right away. He says traditional communism has a huge branding problem because of history, so he prefers the term sharedism.
Sharedism.
The core argument is about maximizing value. He says the more a resource is shared, the higher its value becomes. A private garden is enjoyed by one family, a public park is enjoyed by thousands. Sharedism is the attempt to apply that logic to everything.
But, and this is always the big but with these ideas, Xuefeng actually acknowledges the problem of human nature.
He does. He doesn't pretend people are angels yet. He uses this great analogy about a bicycle.
This part really stuck with me. He just flat out says humans are naturally selfish.
He says, take a poor person who owns nothing but a broken bicycle. Even that person won't want to share their one broken bike. So his point is, if a guy with a broken bike won't share, how can we possibly expect people with wealth and power and status to just voluntarily give it all up?
He also notes that as soon as people get a little bit of power or money. They want to live better than their neighbors, to satisfy their vanity. So we have this inherent conflict. The system needs sharing, but the people are wired to hoard.
And this leads us to his critique of history. The text is very explicit about rejecting historical communist movements.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches on the Soviet Union or even recent Chinese history.
Xuefeng argues that Marx's theory was imperfect and defective. He says past movements failed because they were violent, they were coercive, and they harmed the propertied class.
So if you recoil at the word communism, he basically says, I get it.
He does. He says those movements went against the true nature of what he calls sharedism. He describes his version as refined, gentle, and civilized. No seizing assets by force.
Which is a crucial distinction. It shifts the focus from class struggle to procedure. And this brings us to a really interesting part of the text, the failure of moral education.
Right. This is where he takes a sharp turn away from idealism. Usually when people talk about building a better world, the first step is we need to teach people to be better.
And Xuefeng's argument is that for thousands of years, that's exactly what we've relied on, moral education. We tell people to be kind, be honest, serve the people. We teach it in schools. We preach it in churches.
And his conclusion is,
it hasn't worked.
Worse than that, he calls it fragile and useless. He uses this metaphor of chicken soup or a sedative. It makes you feel good for a moment, but it cures absolutely nothing.
He points to history to back this up, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, officials in China.
Yes, officials raised on Maoist thought, people who were steeped in the ideology of serving the people from birth. Yet, he argues, so many became incredibly corrupt.
Because the system allowed it.
Precisely. He uses a powerful phrase, power in a cage. We always hear that. But Xuefeng asks, what if the cage itself, the political and social structure, is the soil for corruption? Then it doesn't matter how much moral education you give the person inside that cage.
And he even critiques Western democracies here, too.
Yeah.
He points to the polarization in U.S. elections.
He does. He argues that even in the U.S., with all its legal frameworks and moral foundations, you still see people ignoring facts or procedures to win. His point isn't about who wins or loses. It's that when the chips are down, morality is the first thing to go.
So you can't rely on it.
You can't. You need a system where bad behavior is simply impossible, not just discouraged.
So let's get into the fix, the how-to guide. The source outlines the 36 articles of Xuefeng-style communism. And if you thought the promises were bold, the rules are, well, they defy the usual political spectrum. You can't really call this left or right.
It's a true hybrid. Let's just look at property rights. Usually when you hear communism, you assume the state owns everything.
Right, seizure of assets, redistribution.
But Article 2 is explicit. Private property is sacred and inviolable. He argues that you cannot strip capitalists and landlords of their wealth. He believes past movements failed specifically because they used violence against the propertied class.
Okay, that sounds almost libertarian.
Yeah.
But then you flip to the governance section and it gets incredibly prescriptive.
It does. He calls for a small government, one administrator for every 100 people. But the real kicker is Article 23. It states that anyone in a management or leadership position must be single.
Single, as in unmarried.
Unmarried, no partner, period.
What on earth is the logic there? Is it just asceticism?
It's about divided loyalties. The text argues that as soon as you have a spouse and children, your primary loyalty is biologically wired to your family unit. You will naturally prioritize their well-being over the community's.
So to ensure the leader serves the whole, you remove the private family.
You remove it entirely. If you want to lead in the life oasis, you are married to the community. If you decide you want a private family, you step down. It's a mechanism to engineer nepotism right out of the system.
That is a fascinating way to solve corruption. You don't teach them not to favor their kids, you just make sure they don't have kids to favor.
It's procedural, not moral.
And this brings us to a confusing point. We have sacred private property on one hand, but sharedism and no private families on the other. How do these two things coexist?
This is the most crucial part of the blueprint, the two-tier system. See, Xuefeng isn't suggesting everyone is ready for this utopia yet. He proposes two parallel worlds.
Tier 1 is the life oasis.
Right. That's for the perfected souls, people who embody truth, kindness, and beauty. Inside the oasis, everything is shared. No money, no private houses, everyone works for the collective good. That's the sharedism ideal in practice.
Okay. But for everyone else?
For the rest of the world, the people who still have that broken bicycle mentality, capitalism remains in full force. In fact, Article 24 advocates for a surprisingly ruthless free market.
How so?
It says the government should not interfere with wages. It uses the phrase, One willing to hit, one willing to be hit.
Meaning, if I agree to work for $1 a day, the government shouldn't stop me.
Precisely. He argues that trying to force equality on people who aren't spiritually ready for it just breaks the economy. So let the market rage outside the walls. But, and here is the safety net, he mandates that healthcare and education must be free for everyone, universally.
It's such a strange mix. Deregulate the market to maximize efficiency, but provide a floor so no one dies of preventable causes. And speaking of healthcare, Article 17 is wild.
It is. Encourage folk healers. No need for physician qualifications or business licenses, as long as they can cure the illness.
Complete deregulation of medical licensing. If you can fix the patient, you can practice.
It prioritizes results over credentials. And the same for housing. Article 31 says the government should not build housing. Let people build what they want, where they want.
So if I want to build a shack on the side of a mountain, I just do it.
Under this system, yes. He says we should trust the wisdom of the masses to sort out housing.
So we have this blend of utopian socialism inside the oasis and pro-capitalist free markets outside, mixed with some spiritual mysticism and small government libertarianism. It's impossible to put in a box.
It is. It's a third way that rejects both standard capitalism and standard socialism, but we have to ask, who is this actually for? The title involves the toiling masses, or laoku dazong.
Which usually means the poorest of the poor, laborers.
But Xuefeng updates that definition for the modern era. He says, look, you might own a car. You might have a mortgage on a nice house. You think you're middle class. But he argues this is a delusion.
He calls it self-anesthesia.
Numbing yourself to the reality.
Right.
He says if you are one serious illness, one economic crash, or one natural disaster away from ruin, then you are part of the toiling masses. You are living in constant anxiety, grasping at assets that can just disappear overnight.
That hits home for a lot of people. The idea that we're just managing anxiety rather than actually living. You know, if the gas runs out, the car is scrap metal. If the market crashes, the 401k is gone.
Exactly. He argues that without this new model Xuefeng-style communism, these people are doomed to anxiety and suffering forever, regardless of who is president or what party is in power. Changing the leader without changing the production mode, he says, is like changing the soup, but not the medicine.
And that's his ultimate pitch. The life oasis isn't just about efficiency, it's about the elimination of anxiety. He describes a world where doors are not closed at night because the desperate need to hoard is gone.
It all comes back to sharedism. If you have access to everything you need, if the community provides for the elderly, the children, the sick, then that desperate grasping for personal wealth supposedly just melts away.
It sounds incredibly appealing, but also incredibly difficult to execute. It requires a level of trust that, well, most of us just don't have.
And Xuefeng would say that's exactly why you start with the Oasis model. You build it, you prove it works, and you let people see the lack of anxiety for themselves. He claims they've been doing it for 10 years.
But, and we have to end on this, he claims the reason we must do this isn't just for our own happiness, it's because we're being watched.
The higher management theory, yes. Towards the end of the source material, Xuefeng just drops this bombshell. He claims that Earth is actually managed by higher life forms.
Like Gaians? Or gods? What are we talking about?
He uses an analogy. He compares Earth to a wheat field. He says the insects and animals living in a wheat field, they don't realize that the field is being managed by a farmer. They just think it's nature.
Okay, that's a humbling image. We are the bugs in the wheat field.
Precisely. He argues we are just the inhabitants, but there is a higher management tending the crop. And he connects this to the urgency of his plan. He warns that if humanity doesn't change its production mode, if we don't adopt this model, nature's punishment will increase.
Because we're ruining the crop.
Because we are out of sync with the manager's intent. He suggests that all our crises, all the suffering, are signs that we are failing the test. And he positions himself and this model as the one person who has figured out what the farmer actually wants.
He actually says something like, you can't imagine what I can imagine, you can't do what I can do. It's a very confident stance.
Extremely confident. And he challenges the reader not to rush to a negative conclusion. He says, just observe. See if what I say and do fits the laws of human civilization.
It really does force you to think about how we organize ourselves. I mean, even if you reject the angels and the higher management, the critique of middle-class anxiety and the failure of moral education is something that really sticks with you.
It raises the question, is our current anxiety a feature of the system, or is it a bug? Xuefeng argues it's a feature, and the only way to fix it is to tear down the fences, literally and metaphorically.
So he leaves us with a choice. View his blueprint as the ramblings of a madman, or maybe as a desperate survival guide for a species that has forgotten it's living in someone else's garden.
It is certainly a lot to chew on.
That covers our deep dive into the vision of Xuefeng. Thanks for listening.
Thank